welcome to yet another edition of Sight and Insight, episode 15, Alla Prima. And if Connie, David and I sound a bit strange this morning, it's because we've just spent 10 minutes recording this and then I found I hadn't pressed the red button hard enough and nothing had happened. So we're redoing this, and I just hope that we can be as knowledgeable as we were the first time round. I wish you could have heard us. We were really good. However, let's move along here. So we're talking about Alla Prima. And what is it? It's obviously one of those fancy foreign words, a bit like en plein air. And it probably means something quite simple, but Alla Prima sounds really good. So let's go straight away to David and say, what is Alla Prima and why is it helpful to the outdoor painter?
Well, a little bit of the historical background. It is a technique, and I think Alla Prima means all at once, in one go. It's like direct painting. The French group of painters also did this. So it goes back to a lot of the historians group it with a group of painters, Frans Hals, Velasquez, around that time of the 18th century.
I've got 16th century.
16th century, even earlier, 1500s. In which they did a passage probably in some of their portraits, or did a portrait in one go. They felt Velasquez, you can sort of see where he might have accomplished a head in one go and got the form that he wanted to render. He saw what he saw and was able to capture it in a short time. I think as we turn the clock forward and go into the 19th century, we see much more of the application of Alla Prima in outdoor painting and not portraiture, in which the outdoor painter saw the rare moment or the effect of light hitting objects at a certain time of day and realized that they couldn't bring it back. There would never be another day like the day they painted it on. So they would have to return to the spot. It wouldn't work, so they would try to get it all at once, try to get the effect of light, capturing the time of day, the day of the week, and all that in a very short time.
Can you get the day of a week in a painting?
I think you could always title it Tuesday at 2.
Oh, okay, so that would make it more clear, yeah.
But didn't you, the Impressionists were also trying to capitalize on Alla Prima technique in their activities when they were going outdoors and trying to get... I'm just reminded of so many dappled light, Renoir's paintings of dappled light on a woman's dress and the flowers and the path, and that's all Alla Prima.
Yeah, and so it's, if you want to capture that immediate effect, it's pretty much that you have to use that technique. What is it, wet in wet? Is that the other
Wet
expression?
on wet, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the other techniques to compare it to would be the bistering process, which is the very old-fashioned process of maybe putting down earth tones first in a glaze fashion, and but we must remember fat over lean. So the idea that you would want a sort of lean paint first and fatty or oily paint coming in on top of that. And so the old masters would do, they had a lot of problems in their paintings. We can see the Renaissance painters, it looks like they only use browns and things like that, but all we have to do is look up at the Sistine Chapel and realize obviously they had bright colors. And it wasn't until the smoke was cleaned off the Sistine Chapel that they realized how strong the color was in their paintings.
Why was it so smoky? Were they having barbecues in there?
No, they weren't. No, it's very...
In the Sistine Chapel.
Not in the Sistine. No, smoke from the candles and the incense.
Oh, okay, yes.
Incense.
Okay, it all becomes
But
clear.
I do think that what David's referring to is the freshness that you get from putting paint onto the canvas very quickly. There's not a lot of mixing,
So it's purer colour.
Yeah, it's pure color and it's layering of colors. I mean, at least what I read about Alla Prima is that you want to keep layering. And when I think about it, I mean, in my own paintings and my own experience outdoors, there is a quick layering of and gestural kind of painting, so that you're putting your color notes in quickly. You're trying to gain a design, a composition in kind of one go. You know, so I would think we keep emphasizing the painterly or the color notes of Alla Prima, but I think there's probably an in one go design element to it too.
Yeah.
That could be the downfall of some of the ideas of Alla Prima, because just for the sake of it being plein air and out of doors, and that's exactly the way it looked. As you said, then maybe they're sacrificing a little bit of that thought process for a good design, and just going from the point of view, well, it's all done in one go, it's fresh. This is the way it looked.
Right.
Well, that's the way it looked to the individual, that one particular individual artist. I think you did a big piece yesterday.
Well, I was just thinking
explain that, because I thought that was Alla Prima.
I was thinking about that when yesterday I set up an 1830 in the garden. I mean, it was in Essex Greenbelt, and it's right at a pathway. There are a whole lot of trees. You know, it's June. Everything's in full bloom. I mean, with a lot of vegetation, a lot of greenery. In the designing of this piece, I actually reduced the thickness of a couple of clusters of trees, changed the nature of it to some extent, and I think and did it all in this 3-hour time span in which I was painting outdoors. So I was outdoors, I was on site, I was looking at the local color, looking at the local textures and forms, yet I'm altering them design-wise so that it meets with what I would like to see on an 1830 canvas.
Yeah, so it was successful from the design. Oh, that was so the Alla Prima is that all at once, one go, one sitting out of doors, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever it would be. And obviously, as we get bigger with our canvases out of doors and more ambitious to do a bigger canvas, we change that technique has to change a little bit.
Yeah, and
I think go after it with a bigger brush.
Yeah.
But that would be one of the phrases. A lot of the modern phrases, like Alla Prima, was sort of adopted from the 15th century or the 16th century, and it was adopted as a use because it became understanding. I think it comes out of the idea that you're in a rhythm of painting. We talked about painting with verbs. Or in verbs, not nouns. I think it's that rhythm that sometimes you get into, and it's like an automatic brush. Is that you're hitting the right notes at the right time, just like a piece of music. I think it has a lot to do with that sort of timing of things that you do, and I think you work yourself into that state, so you're not too deliberate. But you're caught up in caught up in the rhythm of this leading to this and this leading to, which I think is the natural manner of designing things, is in that caught up in that.
Of putting one note, one brush stroke down next to another, and then not going back to remodel that particular. Exactly.
It's not that you're preparing it. Sometimes we go out and we prepare a painting for the next time out. This next sitting, that you're going to go out and paint. So you prepare your trees in a certain way and your fields a certain way, knowing that you're going to hit it again. I think what...
Right, I was thinking about you hatch in and create all these ways in which there aren't any hard edges, and then you can bring the painting back.
Right.
However, this is nothing like that.
No, I think this is much more deliberate, to the point. We talk about all the other phrases that are used, this direct painting method. We talked about painters such as Sargent and Soroyer and Zorn, who all use this sort of technique of all at one go. And I think it's evident in their work. The paint has a rhythm and a flow to it, as well as Soroyer was always trying to capture people running down the beach and to paint that. I think that's important. Whereas If we took the Impressionists, they like Monet's haystack. Sometimes you go out and work on the same haystack at different times of day. So the same painting was layered.
And Rowan Cathedral was different times
Different
of the day.
times, but it wasn't in one go sometimes.
Right,
Sometimes
right.
he'd bring that haystack back, but he would have his collection of his paintings that he had been laid in yesterday, and he'd have somebody behind him handing him his 10 o'clock hour painting, and then his 10:30 painting, and then his 10.
I wish I had somebody like that. Thank you.
Yeah. So
ahead.
maybe if you're talking about it's going to be direct painting, it's got to be done, put down, and then not remodeled. But does that mean you can't have, say, the undertones from a painting that you did yesterday? If the final surface is all in one go, but put on top of where you've already sort of got the design in undertones or something like that, does that still qualify? I mean, are there Alla Prima police who come around and say, okay, you've obviously worked on this another day, so that's not Alla Prima? Does it?
Yeah,
does it really matter?
Well, I think it can matter. I think if you could did it that way and had your stain correct and you blocked it all in, so it was big blocks of strong, massive color notes right next to each other, it might make it easier then to go in with Alla Prima. I think the real painters you see in the past, Franz Hals is a good one, and I remember my teacher pointing out a passage in this Hals painting of I think it was the Laughing Cavalier, or it might have been something along those lines, in which the gentleman is holding up a glass of port or wine or beer, whatever it be of the day, and he's got a smile on his face, his cheeks are rosy, and Gamel pointed out this little passage over here was painted in one sitting, and it had a certain harmony and unity because of the Alla Prima nature. I think that's why it caught on, because it certainly has this. I think, Connie, you were talking about your painting yesterday. Mm-hmm. Did you start with a white canvas?
No. It was a painted. I paint over paintings a lot, and some people, even yesterday, some people were asking me about, do I, prime it with a white oil primer, and hide that piece? I don't. I love the fact
Isn't
that
it confusing putting a new painting on top of
I
an old
don't find it confusing. I don't know. I just buzz over it, and it comes. I mean, aspects of it come through, and some of it I like, and I might leave it for a while. And then eventually I believe that I take out the former painting.
Yeah.
I've never seen a painting that I've completed over another painting that I've left aspects of it in. But I believe people do that. I was also going to mention something about mistakes in Alla Prima, that I think that when we're doing another technique, we might be obsessed with, well, that's the wrong line there or something. I think you can put dots and dashes and this and that and leave them there, and then go over them, because it is wet into wet, and eventually the piece takes on a holistic, a unified look.
Okay, so are we talking about dots and dashes? Are we talking about happy accidents here? The Bob Ross.
I don't think.
some way.
I think that might be one way, but no, I think the happy accident is something else. I think it's. I think you're in such a rhythm and such concentration of putting the paint down next side by side, that maybe all you're considering is the surface while you're painting. How thick did I paint this part? Well, I better paint it this thick over here. Mm-hmm. If I use the thin paint here, maybe I have to stay with the thin paint all over. Mm-hmm. So I think that idea of Alla Prima has a lot to do with understanding how you're building a surface. And a lot of times, the real good painters I think, reach that point where they're not concerned about the drawing because that they're confident about getting the drawing right, and they're not concerned about the values because they know they'll get the values right. So it's really a technique that I think comes out of you, just to say, wow, I'm really excited about what I see, and it's going to change. The colors are going to change. The lighting effect's going to change. So I better go really fast and get it. Also, too, if we think of a painter like Baldini, it seems like he's using the underpainting of almost like a semi-abstract or just a lot of colors that he throws on the canvas ahead of time, which looks like just colors and shapes. And out of that, he pulls the figure. He's a good figure painter. He'll pull the figure out of it. So you can see in some of his works where there's the beginning, there's the middle, and there's the end, and how much he refines it and pulls it out of that. And I think Connie would know if it's psychological or not, but I think by looking at that abstract, rather than being confused about it, it's like it sets off the figure that much better, because you're dealing then with forms. I'm just trying to render the form of a face. And against an abstract pattern, it's a lot easier as soon as I put down a flat note or a suggestion that this is a shadow of a figure and put it down against that crazy background. Boom, it's really emphasizing the reality of the forms.
Yeah, I hope one of these days that we can actually go to video so that you can see, as David demonstrates, pulling out from all these original colours and abstract shapes, and how you create the form, and boom, and because the hand gestures are wonderful. So one of these days, hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to actually show this to you.
I was also going to say something about the projection, like David's referring to, if there's an abstract, stuff that's on the canvas, and you pull this out like Baldini did, that it has a lot to do with projection. We think of the Rorschach ink blots. That's all about projection. You see an ink blot, which has been standardized by psychologists, so that a lot of people, standardization means that it's been looked at over and over in sort of experimental work, so that there are all kinds of projections that are objectified, that are said, oh, this is definitely a teapot, or this looks like a bat, or whatever it is. And but we all do that constantly. We know that we do it when we see cloud formations.
Yes.
We smoke that's flying up into the air. We might see it as some kind of dragon or something, and all those symbols are part of this bringing something out of nothingness.
That's interesting. Yeah. Judy, the question for you is, from an art historian's point of view, when I did search and I know this is taboo among scholars, is to look on the internet.
Wikipedia.
Did you Google?
You never use Google for any information that you want to really find. You must use books.
You have to use whatever tools you have. You just have to not rely on one source. You have to be able to corroborate it from somewhere else.
Because they had a group of painters down as Alla Prima, which included some very great painters, and I admire them, and I could understand why but they seem to be of that certain period of time in which the historians love to group painters. You're in the Impressionist group, you're in the Rococo period, you're the Baroque. It's a technique, I would imagine, that the Alla Prima is more of a technique that can be used in the 20th century. I think there's many living artists who are using the Alla Prima technique and emphasizing it.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize until I looked it up as to, who invented this? Is this just a new expression to describe something that artists have been doing? And then to find that it goes back to the 16th century, it sort of took me back a little bit, because I didn't realise it went back that far. I guess you're always assuming that the contemporary painters of today are coming up with new ways of doing old traditions, but in actual fact, the oldsters have done this first and foremost. And painting basically comes down to a very personal point of view, I should think, and just how you hold the brush and make your brush strokes, how you mix your colours. Which actually brings me back to another thought. Connie, you were talking at the beginning about layering one colour on another colour, wet in wet. But if you put one colour down on top of another wet colour,
you're mixing.
Yeah, so you're actually mixing
extent.
on the canvas, and then so that some of it remains pure and another bit sort of perhaps goes murky grey.
Yeah, and it never goes murky gray. I mean, people talk about mud. There really isn't. It's a misnomer, I think. David may argue that mud really exists.
Well, I don't think.
And you can get it in a tube too.
I've heard of that.
Buy it overseas; it's cheaper.
Really big tubes of it.
Yeah, exactly.
No, everything comes out of the mud, right? Yeah. And that's a good description of it too. I think, and that echoes what you said about color.
Yeah.
That pigment seems to go towards black, whereas the theory of light goes to light. And I think that's a well understood.
Or white.
Yeah, a white. Yeah. So I think it's a technique, this Alla Prima, in one go. But I think if I was to go a little farther, and because I think I've been practicing it now for ever since I got sick a year or 2 years ago, practicing just a 12-16 in a short period of time. Can I do a 12-16 and have a finished look, what I would, from my personal understanding of finish, in 2 hours? And that's sort of been my goal for the past 2 years. And and so it is all Alla Prima in that sense. But it doesn't mean it's sloppy. It doesn't mean it's so fast that it's not accurate. I think it's the opposite. I think it's more accurate if it's effective, if you get it right.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah.
And I think that one go makes it. And is it because, I think that was your question, is it because the Alla Prima, is it the layering of the paints that doing? I think it would be much better just to describe it as a constant rhythm that the artist put himself in between, deciphering the Rorschach patterns and putting them down as they see them. But it happens so fast and you're making the decisions so fast, there's very little room for mistakes.
Yeah,
is the way I guess you put it, and I think that's what artists love, that, because I think they're experiencing the whole creative process in a very condensed period of time, and they experience the whole creative process in that time. Versus, I'll get back to this. A painter who paints on a painting for 6 months. Years, I mean that's fine. I understand that technique too, but the Alla Prima just has a certain quality of freshness that we like.
Yes, it has that immediacy, because sometimes you can look at paintings and although, yes, they're beautifully rendered, they're so tight and sometimes they look like they're so laboured over that the artist looks like he must have been exhausted at the end of the process just from working on the same thing instead of being exhausted from trying to get it down in one go.
Right.
But I suppose everybody's got to have a different
different techniques,
different feeling.
And I think this has been brought in. I think Connie introduced it earlier as being a good technique for landscape painters.
Yeah.
If they're interested in capturing that moment in time and not just a picture, a pretty picture.
Yeah.
I had a student once used to call it chocolate box covers.
Yeah.
I don't want to paint a chocolate box cover, David. I want to do a work of fine art. So they considered it that way, and but then you always question whether it's just because they want to have a gray-looking painting because that looks more dignified. Gray and brown is more dignified than something with bright orange and bright yellow and bright red in it. I disagree with that, and I think you can make color do all kinds of things. But Alla Prima, I think, is definitely a way of doing it. I think it's a great way of doing it. I see many portrait artists who really, the painters that we talked about in this were mostly portrait artists. Fragonard, Franz Hals, Velasquez, really going after a look in a feature. I think some of the schools in those days, too, taught this gesture painting,
Well-
which means a lot of memory and alla prima work. That
Yeah.
a fellow would be holding a glass in his hand above his head, and then have to obviously couldn't hold that for more than an hour or so without tiring, and then
Hour.
put his hand down. So and probably would never bring it back to the exact same location. So it wasn't a process of measuring; it was a process of seeing the unity as soon as possible, all at once. And maybe that's what it boils down to.
Well,
is seeing at once, at
Yeah.
first glance.
Can you have a painting, particularly a larger painting, whether it's like a studio portrait or something out of doors, where you might have, completed part of the painting over a period of time, but then you just do a portion of it, that direct painting to get that whole effect, just in one, so that a painting might be alla prima in this corner, but not somewhere else. Does that make sense?
I think unification, if it bothers the unity of the painting, I think
Yeah.
then that's the
Then
problem.
you would
Yeah.
Yeah.
wouldn't do that.
That
right.
you'd have to sort of
Right.
make it,
Right.
to make everything look like it was done at the same time.
Yeah, there's that. I think we.
But if you could achieve that,
Yeah.
I think it would be successful.
Yeah.
in the MFA, there's a Paxton in the museum collection, Boston Museum of Fine Arts, unfinished Paxton painting of a nude. And it's unfinished, but it's wonderful because part of it is finished.
Yeah.
And so bringing this alla prima theory into the painting, he probably started. He probably had painted the whole thing, kept it loose and fuzzy to move things around, and so then he said, "Oh, the arm is just the way I want it," and he painted it in one sitting.
Yeah.
That might be a good example of alla prima. And the museum liked it and bought it and hangs it, and it's not a finished painting.
Yeah.
Part of it is alla prima and part of it is finished, but then again the other part looks as finished as that part too. I think that's what a good painter can do is, if I said to a class, 10 brush strokes only, but it's got to have a finished look. Obviously we're going to talk about something that's sort of semi-abstract, but it's designed really well in 10 brush strokes. Okay, now you can use 100 brush strokes. What are you going to come up with? Well, something a little more refined. But those first few brush strokes have to be so expressive in capturing the basic part of that painting. I think it's very important.
You also bring up this, I don't know where I heard this, but that you want to achieve a finished look at every passage or every stage of the painting's progress until it is fully finished, and that's also a place of more sophistication.
A little bit, but it's basic. It's basic in the
Yeah.
sense that what's the phrase, Judy, about who was it that said, a person works with their hands is
Yeah.
the
yes.
CC thing.
Yeah, it's it was attributed to Francis of Assisi, but I've seen various other people claim it as well. A labourer works with his hands, a craftsman works with his head and his hands, but an artist works with head, hands, and heart. So yeah,
I think it all applies. I mean, I think you have to be the craftsman as a painter, because you are doing a craft in the sense that paint has to bond correctly to your canvas. If it's going to flap off in 3 weeks, it's not a very good painting, right? Somebody bought it for a lot of money. I'm sure you're going to get the phone call saying, "I want another painting because your paint just fell off the canvas here." So.
all right. So that brings up a technical question. If you're painting wet in wet, instead of sort of doing glazing where you wait for it to dry and then put another layer on, do you run into problems where the one colour that's underneath takes longer to dry than the next colour you put on top? Is that going to cause problems
It
to
should
the
be
surface?
the drying time is normally 3 days, and it's sort of based on white paint, lead white
Yeah.
or flake white paint, and it's the strongest bond that any artist has in his repertoire of chemicals is the bond of lead, and then you have the cadmiums. I mean, it always sounds like
It's a shame
you're
that
making
they're banning
bombs
it
when you're
because
talking
it's-
about lead
yeah.
and cadmium, and all the other
And now
paint colors.
they want the artists buy it because they have to be protected from their own folly.
I think what you're doing there is going down the path of the surface.
Yeah.
And I think the good craftsman understands if he put down this first stroke in this amount of paint, he's going to find the right amount of paint that covers the whole surface. And that's interesting.
I think that's a good point, though, about the surface finish.
Right.
You know, and maybe in Alla Prima, you will be able to master that finish in one go, which is also extremely important for an artist to understand. It's either a thick base, and I tend to think in my readings of Alla Prima and my understanding of being outdoors that it is going to be thicker than if you were trying to render this in the studio or something, unless that's your technique to create a thickly based finish for your piece.
An artist who had seen me demonstrate asked, she was a watercolorist, and she said, "What would you tell me about the difference between watercolor and oils?" And I really, at first, I was taken back because, gee, I mean, that's a hard one to identify what the differences are. Because, as we all know, it's personal. The technique is personal. What kind of brushes do you use? And the person says, put it on with your big toe, but put it on right. Nobody looks at a sergeant and said, "Oh, you used a number 3 filbert here," or number 5. Who cares? Nobody cares how you put the paint up there. So that part of things is not important, but it's that how much paint you put on in an even way is the real answer to the watercolorist, because it's her paper decision that makes the watercolor different. Some people have a smooth paper, some people have a rough paper. It's the paper that's going to make the surface and not the paint. Whereas an oil painter remakes the surface of his painting. Connie likes to paint on an old painting for many reasons, but it does have already a surface established.
Yeah.
And that helps. So you can paint a little differently with a prepared surface. If I'm just using a white ground, I've got to make sure I cover it, or try to cover it with this sort of the next layer of paint.
Yeah.
So it's the amount of paint you put on, and I think the speed in which we're talking about Alla Prima, the speed in which you're putting it on really helps you to put it on more evenly than if you're being too deliberate.
Yeah.
Thinking too slowly doesn't really help.
Yeah. Okay, so to be a good artist, you have to drink a lot of coffee and work really, really fast.
Well, not just that.
Okay, so we're nearly out of time. So does anybody have any last thoughts they want to share?
No. I can't think of anything.
Okay, well, that's good. So
except for happy painting, it's a beautiful day out
it
here.
It certainly is, and I know Connie and David are going out to paint and teach this afternoon. So we're going to wrap things up. I'd like to leave you with another of my esoteric quotes here. I was looking up a good quote about Alla Prima painting, so I typed in Alla Prima. And what I got was a quote here from Queen Elizabeth II, of all people. And her quote was, "Football's a difficult business, and aren't they prima donnas? But it's a wonderful game." And all I can say is, go England. So until next week, we'll bid you all a goodbye and have a great day. And thanks for listening.